Good morning. This is the local scene with Don DeBar. Welcome. I'm Don DeBar. Today here, where we're taping, it's actually Friday night, about 9:45 p.m. on the 14th of May. Hopefully it is Saturday morning, 11 o'clock, where you are, May 15th, 22nd, or 29th. We've got a lot of stuff to cover in our little half hour. We're going to start dealing with, first thing I want to do is thank everybody that's been calling me at home, and I also encourage you to do that. You'll see the phone number flash a few times. It's 945-0815, for calling and offering to help with the campaign to stop the wasting of our riverfront. I've got phone calls from people that are walking petitions all over town, and if someone asks you, by the way, to sign it, after you read it, if you agree, please do. Secondly, or actually in conjunction with that, there's been a whisper campaign, more than a whisper, by village and town officials that it's too late to stop this development, that I don't know what I'm talking about, that it can't be stopped at this point. It's a lot of nonsense. It is nonsense, and it is intended to discourage you from trying to stop it. Here's the deal. It is not a done deal. There is only a development agreement. There are a number of steps that have to be gone through before this deal can happen, and those steps have not begun yet. It is very possible and quite easy to stop this deal. First thing that you can do is sign the petition when someone asks you to do it. The second thing you can do is start showing up for board meetings. Stay in touch with the village clerk's office. Ask Marie Fusey if for the agenda for all the planning and ZBA board meetings over the next month and a half, and also the village board meetings. Call on the days of those meetings. We're talking Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. Call that day and find out. Okay, if you need more information about this, call me at my home at 945-0815. Leave a message. I'll tell you what you need to do. But if you want someone to bring a petition to you that you want to sign, call that number also. 945-0815, and somebody will bring it to your house. If you want to carry petitions, the more the merrier. We got a lot of folks carrying them around at the condos now, at Eagle Bay, where Penny lives, at Charter Circle, at the co-op there, at Scarborough Manor, all over the place. And I encourage you to do the same. Anyway, that's one thing. The fact that it's a done deal and can't be stopped is a bald-faced lie. So, and we're going to stop it, aren't we? There's also been people taking photographs of some of the goings-on around Ossining, like on Water Street and down at the waterfront. That's also interesting, and they're going to play an interesting role in the hearings that come up, and perhaps in court, too. Also, I've been talking now for a little while about how one of the major things that the village was going to suffer was going to be increased costs to the school district. And that people would be facing some very unpleasant choices about school buses in their backyards and such. Well, here it comes. On the 28th of April, I'm going to show you some footage of this and of some other things, too. On the 28th of April, there was a meeting at Roosevelt School for a hearing, which, by the way, the school board didn't think was important enough to have cable cover. Okay, that's another matter we'll talk about a little bit, too. And more than 150 people showed up, and they were angry. They had to move the meeting from the little room upstairs down to the large room where the seniors are often, and it was packed, and the people were pouring out of both doors, and you'll see that too. And you'll also see the little nervous look on the board president's and the superintendent's face, because the people were very upset. Here's why. An engineer was making a presentation about moving the 60 school buses that are now down at the waterfront that have to be hastily relocated because of this riverfront project. And they decided they were going to investigate 3 sites. Roosevelt School, with all the houses that are around that, and no adequate road in or out. N.M. Dorner, with the homes and the apartments that are near that, and the already overburdened traffic that's there. Or Brookside School, which somebody must have made a phone call from up there because that died really quick for the moment. Anyway, these people showed up and were very, very upset. Then there was another meeting a week later. Oh, first of all, the board voted 7-0 against their own proposal that night, and the proposal was a joke. The engineer's report for example, had cooked numbers like, and the engineer couldn't, after studying these 3 sites, couldn't remember the names of any of the streets. There's only 7 streets to remember. He couldn't remember one. In front of 150, 175 people, whatever, a lot of people. Anyway, they had these 3 sites studied, and one of the things was they were going to build a road for 60 buses to travel over that was going to be about 1,300, 1,400 feet long, like a 1/5 of a mile to a 1/4 of a mile. And they had as a cost for building this road, like for clearing it, leveling it, and improving it to withstand 240 bus trips a day, or better than 1,000 bus trips a week. They had $100,000 as a cost for that. Now, the average person, that seems like a lot of money. Anybody in construction that has to build roads, for example, knows that's a lot of nonsense, that it's going to cost that every year if they do it that way. At some point, they're going to have to spend $1 million to build a real road that'll hold the buses, just like they have to do in any subdivision that gets built. Right? People that are in construction know that those numbers are fantasy. Anyway, so then after they voted their own proposal down, they went out for an hour and a half in executive session, and hoping that, I think, that the people would go home, because they went into executive session at 11:15. This is a 7:30 meeting. It started at 20 to 8. 70 people stayed and waited it out, and they were saying things, we will sleep here if we have to. We're going to have our voices heard. So they spoke before for the 3 hours, roughly, and then afterward against that project that is relocating the buses at the schools, and then against the weasel resolution that the board came up with, which said, let's have the superintendent investigate putting some buses temporarily at some schools. And so they voted that they voted in favor of that 4-3. The 3 that had the backbone to stand up to the village, basically, and we'll talk about that in a minute, were Shondi Speller, whose backbone, again, shows, and I'd like to thank her for taking a stand on it. For Nick Caputo, who always speaks his mind at these meetings, whether you agree with him or not, and also for Thomas Knight, who has come down on the right side of a lot of issues, and I'm grateful for his backbone on this also. The 4 that voted against, Chris Heath, Marty Stewart, Mickey Weiss, and Sally Lewis, you're on the wrong side of it. And everybody there said that they're trying to go in the back door, and a week later they decided that, okay, we're going to put 10 buses at all 3 schools, and we're not going to do any site improvements. It's only going to be temporary. So after they say this, Nick Caputo starts reading, and it has to do with Roosevelt, where they had just said, Mickey Weiss and Chris Heath, I believe, you'll see the videotape of it, had just said there won't be more than 10 buses, there'll be no site improvements. He starts reading that they're planning between 7 and 14 buses at Roosevelt. The houses are, like 30 feet away from where these buses are going to be starting up every morning at 5 o'clock. And that if they have more than 7, that they're going to have to do site work. They're going to have to take the big fence down that's behind there. They're going to have to shore this up, improve that, all of this. In other words, they were lying. So he's reading from this thing, and they say, Nick, that's a confidential memo, as if that were the issue. So he said something to the effect, look, I'm tired of, listening to everybody lie to these people. Tell them the truth. And anyway, so you're going to see all of that. However, most interesting thing, at the first meeting, where you're just going to basically get a sense of how many people were there, I'll air that meeting at some point in the future. The mayor of Ossining, after listening to everybody say that they did not want these buses at the schools, or in other words, realizing that he was going to upset the school election and a whole lot of other stuff, and then after I said, gee, if it's such a crisis, why don't we block the eviction from the riverfront? Why don't we keep the school buses there? In other words, let's go to court and get an injunction against the village evicting us. And Nick Caputo elaborated on that. He said, geez, that's a good idea. If you go to court in a house eviction, and the people have kids, they're a couple months behind in the rent, they make a plan to stay. The judge, when the mother comes to court with the kids, and even if the landlord's in the right, they don't throw you out on the street. Well, so let the village come to court with their lawyers and accountants, and the developers' lawyers and accountants, who are the ones, I guess, that'll hold sway. and let the school board go with our kids who are going to be looking at a problem, and the neighbors who are going to be breathing in bus fumes now. Because right now, the buses are far away from where everybody lives, although they're going to build condos on top of where they've been, contaminating for the last group of years. Anyway, so in that environment, like basically in the middle of an uprising and the possibility of litigation, the mayor said in front of 70-some-odd people and a video camera, well, I'm going to go back. I spoke to the developer today. Well, as you know, he said to the board members, and, maybe you should proceed as you are, but I'm sure I can get a 3-month extension. Anyway, he chatted on for a few minutes. At the end of that, he was promising a 6-month extension. So then the Gazette publishes, Ossining schools get more bus time from Village in the week of May 6th through 12th. And I know you can't read it, but this is the Gazette. This is where it says that. It's a very long story, and he quotes the mayor in there accurately. So then, a couple days later, apparently, in fact, the next day after this was published, which is a week later, they had the second meeting, and before the second meeting, the mayor had revoked his offer, and it was known to the board and the public at that meeting at the time. So they had to vote on this other resolution, which they passed 4-3, that they're going to stick the buses there. Nobody wanted to consider, except for the 3 who voted against this, the possibility of getting an injunction against the village, or just not leaving, and making the village go through a formal eviction process, and then contesting it. In the meantime, finding a place to put the buses that makes sense, or taking bids from other suppliers so that we can have the buses not next to people's houses and not have our school taxes go up $300,000 to $500,000, which is what Bauman is saying is going to happen. Okay? Now, the mayor told us, remember, we're going to make $1 million a year off this project at the riverfront, no cost. We didn't even move the buses yet, and we're already spending $500,000 a year. There's a lot more coming. We didn't start drilling for oil yet either, for all you Jed Clampett fans. Okay, so anyway, next day, the Gannett paper, having heard from the mayor that he never said this, sees the Gazette and calls the mayor back up. He denies ever saying it. So then they call Nick Caputo and ask him his recollection. And he says, you don't need my recollection. Don DeBar has it on videotape. So then I'm sitting down at the TV studio and the phone rings. And someone answers it and says, hi, Tom. And they go through this whole thing. Anyway, he was calling looking for the videotape. That's what it sounded like. I mean, I happened to be sitting next to the phone. I didn't talk to anybody about it. But that's what I heard. So anyway, now where we are is looking at a school board election this Tuesday if you're watching this on the 15th, okay? Now, I'm going to show you first the videotape of the buses. And Martin, could you roll that videotape, please? I'll explain to you what's going on here. These are the buses that are parked at the riverfront right now. There's more than 60 of them. There's a lot of them, whole lot of buses. And they got to go someplace because they're going to be building condos down here on top of the oil slick, or so they think. Hopefully we're going to stop them. And I think we're going to. Okay, there's Chris Heath and Bob Raleigh looking at the crowd like, whoa, where do these people come from? Okay, here's the engineer trying to explain things without remembering the names of the streets, of course, why the buses should go there. There's all the school board listening to the presentation and shaking their heads. Here's the first person speaking about why they shouldn't go next to his bedroom at Roosevelt. Another person why they shouldn't be next to their house. One person after another, upset, angry. You see the crowds applauding them when they're talking about don't do this to us. The board, some of them heard it. There's another person that's angry about it. They're just talking and talking. The board's taking notes. They end up voting against their own proposal and an $8,000 study they've spent money on, 7-0, when they finally find out from a group of people showing up en masse that people don't want buses next to their houses. Duh. Note that none of the members of the school board live near any of the sites where the buses are going, nor do any of the administrators. It's a very interesting thing to note because they never had to think about what would buses be like next to that. And here we go. That's the end of that segment. Okay, you get the idea. So the next thing that I want to talk about, this is the consequences of Mayor Tom Cambereri's vision plan, okay, for the waterfront. Increased cost to the school district and a lot of upsetting of people's neighborhoods, okay? People up at Vets Park, by the way, take note, okay? Anyway, we're going to go to, I don't think you need to take note. You've already seen the clearing of the forest behind the park already. That wasn't going to happen. I'd like to roll the next thing, and there's audio on this for you to listen to. Pay attention to what's going on here. This is going to be about 8 minutes long, and then I'll come in and I'll fill you in. Go ahead.
That's unfair to know that.
This resolution authorizes the negotiation with Ballon. Am I right to assume that the final results of that negotiation come back to be ratified by this board?
Yes.
Right.
It goes right to my house.
Wait a minute, there's some things that need clarification by that Mr. League and Ms. Hoffman said. As I have it here, Roosevelt Education Center, there's a blacktop area to the east of the existing parking lot behind Roosevelt Education Center. Bauman Bus could park 7 to 14 large buses on this blacktop area, although the resolution says 10, up to 10. If we allowed more than 7 buses, the site would be impacted in that the fence would have to be removed, we would lose 15 parking spots, and we would have to provide toilet facilities as mentioned above.
Reading from a confidential document.
Well, you say 10 here and then you say here. You're calling that confidential. I don't want the people to misled.
That was for your protection.
Okay. My protection, I'll put my neck on the line. I have attorneys that I can hire if I have
Liga of 26 Ramapo Road. I would like to ask a question about the buses. I would like to know from each of you whether you will vote yes or no to allow movement of the school buses to Roosevelt, Brookside, and AMD.
All right, first answer from Mrs. Joslow.
Transportation is at the core of our school system. I believe that one of the biggest strengths of our school system is its grade-based buildings. As a result, Ossining has a much larger busing program than other school systems. The bus depot, however, is not only a school problem, but a community-wide problem that will require continued cooperation not only between the schools, but also with the village and the town. For the record, I do not support industrial use of land in a residentially zoned area. I find it inconceivable that there's no land in the entire village or town that is available for a bus depot. Embedded in this premise, though, is the fact that we're going to require village approval to issue zoning variances. The community may have to compromise for the short term and accept the 10 buses at 3 schools as a Band-Aid solution. I do not want to see our transportation costs increase in the existing budget, as that would mean that we would have to sacrifice educational programs. By allowing a few buses to be parked on school property and not constructing a permanent depot, the plan will buy us another year in the hopes that a solution can be found. The plan that the board adopted is temporary, will allow us to maintain our current transportation budget and ensure busing. The plan accommodates all of the interests at hand, those being the safe busing of children, respect for the concerns of neighborhoods, while still falling within the budget guidelines. I want to emphasize, however, that I would only support this as a temporary solution.
All right, Mr. Santiago.
I understand this is a big issue, and I understand that we have to work on this. I wouldn't want school buses in residential areas, but I understand that our students are going to need transportation. I would like to work so that something that can be done where they can have a main garage for the buses built, even if they can't all be kept at this main garage, that they can be kept in other areas. I would like to keep it away from a residential area.
Mr. Caputo.
I believe when people had purchased their houses near the schools, they realized there would be school bus traffic. But nobody would envision having either a school bus facility, a dispatch facility, or a storage facility on or near about their property. At the recent 2 school board meetings, I voted against the school bus dispatch facility, and I also voted against the storage of 10 buses or so at 3 sites, which right now would be not Brookside, but Ossining High, AMD, and Roosevelt. And I challenged my board members at that time, 4 board members of which that voted for that. Would they vote for either a bus storage facility near their house, or park, every one of the 4 take a bus and park it in their driveway or in their neighborhood? Would they be for that? Because if you're for that, then you can vote yes for it. I don't believe that they would be for it, so I don't believe that they should have voted to put it on property that's in neighborhood areas. They had asked me, well, what is your answer? I still say put pressure on the village. There's property that's down there that's already not set aside for waterfront development. The developer's going to park trucks and equipment on that property. The mayor himself, there's doubts as to whether he meant it or not, but at 12:30 a.m. at one of the meetings, he said we can extend it, the village can extend the lease for 3 or 6 months. Somebody from the audience brought up a court injunction. I say it's very difficult to evict anybody, so I say challenge it and fight it, but don't put it in the neighborhoods. Just continue the fight. And the bus company himself, the contractor, is still continuing to look for property where he might store it that would be other than school property.
I'd like to see the mayor deny this.
All right, Mr. Apostolico.
For those of us who had the pleasure of attending the board meetings, the heated board meetings on this issue, I stood up at one of the meetings and spoke against the buses being parked on any school property or building facilities to facilitate school buses. However, I still strongly believe that the current Board of Education again was faced with another difficult problem, to find a solution to bus our kids to school. And knowing the current Board of Education and their interest in our children, they tried to do everything possible to ensure that we have busing come September 8th of next year. And they tried to do that without raising the budget. And the budget has been voted on, and it's submitted for the public next week. And that's the current busing allocations, $2.4 million. And I also said that, you know, there's a lot of other bus companies out there willing to bid on that type of contract. But due to the circumstances, again, I think it was unfairly put on the Board of Education's lap. And it seems like it's the last minute, and I understand there were some other committees and groups that worked a year, aside from Bauman knowing 2 years ago that they would have to vacate the facility, and then all of a sudden at the last minute, boom, we're in a crisis. So I still haven't figured that part out yet, and the school board should protect the quality of life and the grounds on their school property.
Thank you. Mrs. Hutto?
I mentioned before that I think there are issues that are not just school board issues, and I think this is one of them. I think this is a school board issue, but it also involves the village and the town. We need to work together and solve this together. I'm respectful of the current school board, and I believe that, in fact, they have all the pieces of the puzzle, and it's very difficult to sit at a table without all those pieces. I have not been privy to all the confidential information that they have, and that makes it hard to make a decision. However, in any decision that I would make on the school board, I would have to ask myself, how would I feel if this impacted my neighborhood? And I have to say that I would not be happy to have school buses in my neighborhood.
But she doesn't say
Mr. Knight?
no.
Yes, as it stands right now, the Board of Education has presented a short-term solution. My position has been, I voted against the use of school district property for a bus dispatch facility, and I also voted against the use of district property to park buses on it. Without going into contract issues at this time, there are other ideas that will be looked at and that I would be in favor of for a long-term solution without using district property.
All right, we're coming down to the wire for...
No, twice. Okay, so we had first Alice Joslow, who gave us the long-winded explanation. It was a yes or no question. Alice Joslow gave us a very long explanation and then said basically she approves of the resolution that the board approved. In other words, she would vote yes. She didn't say she'd vote yes, but she said the ones that voted yes were right, and that means she'd vote yes. Diego Santiago said that basically he would vote yes. He said that the balance, one thing against the other, is if it's either
we have the buses at these sites or the kids don't have buses. That's not the case at all. Nick Caputo voted against it everywhere down the line, saying, do not put the buses there, it's no good, it's not good for the people that live there, it's not a permanent solution, it doesn't solve anything, it just postpones it. I mean, we're going to be in the same boat in 6 months, by the way, folks, except that now these buses are going to be kicked off the waterfront. There won't be any time to plan for this properly, and what's going to happen is that all they're going to do is get blocked everywhere else they go, and they're going to stay at these locations, and there's going to end up being 20 or 30 of them at each of these locations. Okay, then J.D. Apostolico, who spoke out against them at both public meetings, spoke out against the stuff being stashed on school property near people's houses, he's going to vote no. And Thomas Knight, who voted no twice also, is going to vote no. And Sharon Hudo, who spoke right before Thomas, she was the next to the last speaker, gave a long-winded explanation that she wouldn't like them near her house. But she didn't say, I'd vote no. So there are 3 people that are running that will vote no. Nick Caputo, Thomas Knight, and J.D. Apostolico. So if you don't want the buses near you, it seems to me that the thing to do on Tuesday is to turn out and vote for those 3 people. If you live in any of the neighborhoods where these school buses are going, or if you're in favor of blocking the development process at the waterfront. Okay. Now, that takes care of that. As far as Mayor Cambereri's denial goes about ever saying this stuff, you'll see a little retraction. I feel bad because the reporter who covered it accurately, but because he hasn't seen the videotape yet, he retracted, he wrote this, editor's note. In last week's paper, it was reported that Mayor Cambereri, speaking at the tail end of the school board meeting a week earlier, announced the village would allow up to an extra 6 months for Bauman to find an alternate location for the storage maintenance facility. Mayor says his comments were misinterpreted in the article. Mayor said he offered to continue investigating possible use of village-owned sites, including a combination thereof that had previously been ruled out by the village as not available. That's a bald-faced lie. He says nothing like that on the videotape. Okay, and any accommodation by the village could extend no longer than a month-to-month basis, according to the mayor. He also didn't say that, although he doesn't say that here either. It's something he was saying to clarify. I'd like to challenge him to take an oath and say he didn't make that offer. Okay? Anyway, I'd like to finally ask you guys that have been working on this riverfront thing to really get that petition thing going, because what I really would like to do that would be really, really useful would be to deliver 2,500 signatures on the petitions to the mayor on the stage at the village fair on June 12th. From today, the first time you're seeing this, which is May 15th, that's about a month. And at the rate things are going, we should be able to do it pretty easily. I'd much rather hand him 10,000 signatures, but I don't think we'll have that until after 4th of July weekend. But 2,500 will be a good start. It'll let them know that, I mean, that's more than enough to swing any village election or the town election, both of which are coming up in November. It will be the writing on the wall for them. Maybe they will finally understand that their jobs are at stake here, not just our quality of life. And if that's the thing that matters to them instead, fine. Let's deal with it at that level. Okay? I think we have, what, about a minute left? Less than a minute. So I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to ask you again for the real information that, that I have, like some in-depth information about the waterfront deal itself, some of the documentation and such. Tune in on Wednesday nights on this channel at 9 p.m., except you're going to miss it this coming Wednesday while they do the Regents Review. Thanks for watching. I'm Don DeBar. This is The Local Scene. I'll see you again. Keep those phone calls coming, 945-0815, and call me for a free T-shirt that says we want a riverfront park. And call me if you want someone to bring the petition to you to sign, or if you want to walk them around. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kathy BALLOFFET. This is Leslie Plotka. We are officers of the Greater Ossining Community Dialogue. And tonight we have a program which for a half hour has a lot to say, but quickly I wanted to make some announcements. The dialogue group met on March 23rd and will be meeting again on March 3rd at the May 3rd, thank you, at the high school, in the library at the high school at 7:30. It's a Monday night. Some of us watched The Color of Fear on Saturday, April 17th, and there will be a follow-up, not sponsored by us, but sponsored by the Pleasantville Presbyterian Church, which also showed the same film last month, and that will take place this Sunday, April 25th at 6:30. That's on Bedford Road in Pleasantville. And this coming Friday, April 30th, there will be a presentation and discussion led by Richard Lewis, who wrote Black Cop, The Real Deal. He's had a lot of experience with police community relations, with working with kids, and it should be quite an interesting evening. This is at the Trinity Episcopal Church on Highland Avenue in Ossining at 7 o'clock on Friday the 30th. And now I'm going to turn over to Leslie to host the rest of our show.
Thank you. Recently, the Village of Ossining began the process of entering into a deal with a developer in the Westchester to rebuild the waterfront. I was hoping that we could spend this 30 minutes discussing the implications of taking community land and putting it to one use as opposed to another use. The Village of Ossining has essentially bought up the various parcels of land on the waterfront, sometimes actually against the will of the people who currently own it, using their power of eminent domain to essentially possess land that was privately owned, and is now in the process of selling again this land, this property that now is owned by the village, to a developer named the Capelli Company, for his private use. On that land at the present time is a projected luxury residential area. Ironically, it is being placed in the most impoverished part of the village of Ossining. And I think this raises a lot of questions that hopefully we'll be able to discuss to some degree tonight. The questions especially, I think, revolve around the issues of what this means for the Ossining community, and indeed what it means for the different segments of the Ossining community. You might say that there are several different Ossining communities that might for which this might have a different impact. The questions of what a luxury development means in terms of the racial problems, racial issues, ethnicity, class, how that plays into this. The distinction between what the village's interest might be in terms of the government versus the actual interests of the residents who currently live in the area. Finally, what it means to use our land, what our land is there for. This is community land at the moment. It is quite literally community land, as it is owned by the village. Is this land that should be put to use for the entire community, as for instance, as I think will be discussed, turning it into a park that could be used communally by all the people in the community, or is this land that will now be sold to people who actually do not live in our community, who will come in if they can afford, of course, afford the ticket, which will be quite considerable given the luxury nature of the development. I think now I'd like to ask our two guests, who I'll first introduce, if they could say a little bit about the project. On the far right is Don DeBar. He is a resident of the Ossining community with a strong background in real estate. He's working currently on this waterfront development plan. Well, let me put that differently. He's trying to influence the future of the plan. Also, next to him and myself is Ray SEIDELMAN. He's another resident of Ossining who teaches political science and social geography at Sarah Lawrence College. He has interests in how developments of this sort can be shaped, and particularly with a view to having the various classes and races in the community living together. And now I'd like to start by asking Don to say a few words.
Hi. First of all, thanks for letting me be on. I feel like I live in the studio lately, but this is a good opportunity to actually have an exchange of ideas with other people. It's new in the process that I've been involved in the last month or two with this. There's a few things that I've had the benefit of seeing as someone that's involved in real estate for 27 years that kind of gives you a perspective on how this process works. And that having some idea of that, if I can explain it or articulate it effectively, may help people see how I came to believe that I think the way to look at this waterfront is as a community resource, and that it should play a central role in the planning of the rest of the village, or the development of the rest of the village. One thing that is sort of a foundation of that approach is the fact that you have to keep in mind that the waterfront in these river communities was the focal point of economic development as the Europeans came into the area, you know, over the last 400 years or so, and last 350 years probably, more accurate. And it was easy to transport goods, materials, back and forth from the various communities by the river. Everybody stayed close to the river so they could do that. Industry sprung up there. And up until 40 years ago or so, that was maybe the peak period of economic development along the riverfront in the industrial age. That was a use that every generation inherited for the riverfront. So there was never really a question before of what to do with it until now, because those businesses went away. The economy matured, as they call it, or in any event, the essence of it changed. And so the things that the businesses and the commercial activity that was conducted, different types of commercial activity that were conducted at the riverfront before are no longer conducted there. The land fell into disuse in a lot of places, or is underused in a lot of others, and gives people the opportunity for the first time in their history to take a look at it in its raw state and say, what can we do with this? What can this do for our community? Now, this happens within the context of a legal, social, and political, I don't know, megillah called a planning process. And there are a variety of models, of historical models, even recent history, that you can choose from. One historical model might be, for example, how the Briarcliff community handled the proposal to develop the old King's College for the Terrace Cultural Center. There were people that came in, a developer came in and saw this land that was being, underutilized and that could be obtained at, a bargain, basically. They had a use for it as a cultural center. And so this is someone from the outside coming into the community and saying, hey, we like what you have, we'd like to join your community, we'd like to do this. And so the way that the legal evolution of real estate law, the whole body of it, has come to, let me step back for a second. Essentially, the legal environment is one where a great deal of local control exists. Over planning issues, over real property use issues, and the power, police power, or the state power of the municipality, the village, town, county governments over what can be built, what uses can be obtained out of a piece of land. They're very strong. Now, what does that mean? In a community where the residents are very involved in the political process, that means the residents have a great deal of control over the uses of properties in, you know, in their village. So when someone comes in and says, we want to do this, the community can say, show it to us. Oh, we don't like that, or we think you should do this. There can be a give and take, and then everyone decides to do a deal or not. That's one model. In an affluent community like Briarcliff or Scarsdale, that's generally the model that's followed, because the people that live there have the economic power, and you know, you have usually demographically higher levels of education in certain types of professions that lend themselves to, you know, they translate into political power. You have other models where you have communities that don't have a strong tradition of involvement in daily decision-making in the community, where you have the same legal structure. The village board or the town board can say yes or no, or the planning board, over a particular proposal that someone comes from the outside or someone in the community brings to say, we want to do this with a piece of property. But if the people aren't involved in that process traditionally, or, you know, in practice, then that means that a couple of folks get to make the decisions, and the rest of us have to live with it. Now, I would contrast what happened with Tara in Briarcliff Manor to the way the proposal for the waterfront has evolved, and show, and on that say basically, look, the people in Ossining aren't used to having to deal with this kind of stuff, and in my opinion, they got snookered on this particular deal, and only now that some of the details of the real deal had to start to come out, because they had to be filed and published. Now people are finding out what they're getting, and they're not so crazy about it. And perhaps this may be a catalyst that makes them get involved in the political process.
You want to say for a minute what it is that...
Well, there's a number of things. First of all, it's one thing when your public officials go on television and in the press and you know, over a period of time, when they got the Maui parcel, for example, and say, we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's in terms of possible contamination at the Maui site, and there is none. Trust us. Okay, that's one thing. There's another thing when you draw a contract dealing with the disposition of that land, and you have state regulations to comply with, and you have to say what's there. All of a sudden, what's clean or not has to be quantified. And we're coming up to a point where that's going to be true. There's going to be a record somewhere of how polluted that site is. So, since people start, you know, very often nobody will talk about it. I started talking about it, and a lot of other people in this community started talking about it. We're doing it on television. I'm doing it right now on television, okay? And so they have to have a plan B. And maybe their plan B won't work if enough of us get involved.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on some of the things that Don has said. I think that I agree with most of them. My interest has been what the ripple effects of this development. And I don't know if the viewers know exactly how many units are going to be built, or there's going to be over 300 units built down at the waterfront. There'll be some of them that are called affordable, but my friend Dr. Platka here at a village board meeting actually said a fairly interesting thing. He said, well, about 10 to 20% of these units will be affordable, but that means that actually the rest will be unaffordable. I think that's a great way of putting it. As Dr. Platka said, the fundamental aspect of the development, which is interesting, is that in order to draw business to downtown, the village board has decided to give give this project to a developer that will build very high-cost units in the hopes, and this is the plan, if it's successful, with the hopes that this development will be connected very closely to the development of downtown. Now, the question for me, as a person, as an Ossining resident, but also as a person who has some academic and intellectual interest in this, is what's meant by development? Do we mean development by a market in which basically none of the decisions that we get to make about our village are made by the people through a democratic process, but are made by basically people with money? We live in a capitalist society. We live in a country in which private enterprise is you know, praised and entrepreneurs are heroes. However, for myself, I think we need to have a balance in this village. We need to have also a system in our village where we need to identify what the decisions that are going to be made by government are about this development and its ripple effects on everybody in this village. And we need to know, we need to be able to make clear decisions, very clear decisions about exactly how to shape that development. So maybe unlike Don a little bit, I tend to think, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, that this development may be it's too late to stop it. If I had gotten, a lot of people had gotten involved 2-3 years ago, I think it might have been shapeable and stoppable. I still think, however, that there are many things that Ossining residents can do and the village government can do. One ripple effect. Let me just identify them quickly. The biggest ripple effect of all is that if the development is successful, it will develop downtown by means of upping property values. Now, for some people, this is great. If you own property, this is terrific. Most of us don't own property downtown. If you do own property downtown, your tendency will be to say, let's sell it out to the highest bidder. This process is already going on. And guess who's one of the first beneficiaries of it? Our friends, the Capelli Enterprises, have bought up 2 choice sites downtown. One, I understand today, we understand he's bought 2 Church Street, and he's bought the beautiful bank at the corner of Highland Avenue and Main Street. Now, who's going to shape this process becomes the question. Do we want to become Capelli land? What are Mr. Capelli's intentions for these properties? The second implication for real people.
Let me just interrupt just to remind people who might recognize the name Capelli. It was recently in the news. I'm a physician, and I am sometimes at Westchester County Medical Center. Capelli was the developer chosen to build the garage at Westchester County Medical Center. The conditions under which the contract was signed were so onerous and maladapted to the hospital where it was built that eventually, in the last couple months, the hospital has decided at its own loss to simply buy back the parking garage. The Capelli's plan that went through was to essentially charge onerous fees to park cars for the people, essentially people who are going to visit their ill relatives in the hospital. And this was creating such a bad publicity problem and for the hospital, along with tremendous you know, the obvious effects of not being able to visit sick relatives if you happen to be impoverished, that it was bought out. And a interesting footnote is that 10 to 20% of the profits that were being reaped each year were going actually to our the household of our Westchester district attorney.
So the point is, I guess we have to hope that Mr. Capelli is benign in our case. But the fact is we don't know whether he will be benign or nice to us, or he's like Santa Claus a little bit at this point, I think, for the members of the village board. He can be naughty, he can be, you know, if we're naughty and if we're nice, it depends on whether Mr. Capelli wants to be nice to us.
I don't agree, first of all, if I can interrupt, Ray. I don't agree that it can't be stopped. Just looking at the process physically, mechanically, legally. As a matter of fact, really, all that's happened so far is that a development agreement has been signed.
True.
And there's some preliminary steps up to that which bind us even less. But the only thing that we could get stuck with, and this isn't even a home run yet, is a parking garage. The way this contract is drafted, it is contingent on a million different things. And one of them is the cleanup costs at the Maui site only coming to a total of $700,000. Now, that is a fantasy to start with. It's an automatic escape clause that, in my opinion, was intentionally put in there so that people could watch over the life of this project and keep their options open. People except for the village. The village would be stuck with it if, well, see, there's a whole lot of things that go with the environmental.
Let's try. I'm interested in what Ray was saying insofar as if it does go through, you were just
if it does go through, we have a couple of years. Right. I appreciate Don's sentiments, by the way, and I would be hopeful that we could build a park, but I would say my own estimate would be that there's too many people who have a stake in this and who are empowering the village right now in order for it to be stopped, but there's a chance of that.
Legally it can be stopped, that's all I was saying. It can be stopped.
But along the way, we still have many points as citizens of Ossining to intervene in what happens when the development is built or as the development is being built. One point of intervention. If the Capelli development is successful, it means that property values will go up. A lot of people, mostly poor people, working poor people who live in Main Street and the areas around that, Main Street, presently live in relatively low-cost units. Even though they are suffering, they're still living in relatively low-cost units. When downtown Ossining is developed, this means that landowners and landlords will have an incentive to either sell their places to be demolished, to be replaced by commercial outlets and stores, or they will up their rents. The village can stop this process. It can guide this process so that we can have a mixed downtown which does have commercial uses, it has housing uses for all the classes and races and ethnic groups in this village. And it's very simple how to do that. First off, you do something like the town of Ossining just did yesterday. You sort of say, for one thing, let's recognize that we have a lot of low-cost housing in this town, and we want to make it better. And we're going to rezone parts of the areas west of Highway 9 in such a way that we encourage landlords to come forward with so-called illegal housing where they're stacking people, doubling up. And we want to use Capelli money or money that comes out of this development to improve that housing and to make sure that those landlords cannot sell it to speculators. Second, we can develop apartments above the storefronts on Main Street. Presently, zoning in Ossining does not allow us to develop what many people who do urban history and urban politics say healthy cities always have pedestrians and they have people mixed up with shops. Those apartments above there, that housing above Main Street is presently zones that only the owners of the stores can live in them, and almost none do. We could change that. We could, thirdly, there's a lot of abandoned properties in Ossining, and guess what? Who are they going to be sold to? The village of Ossining, on the tax rolls because of tax foreclosures, could give or sell it at very cheap rates, housing that's abandoned and properties and lots that are abandoned, and give it to places like Habitat for Humanity or the Interfaith Council for Action, where low-cost housing for ordinary, regular Ossining people could be built. Now, I don't see the village of Ossining doing any of those things. All I see is they say, we got a rich guy building down here, we want downtown development, let's just let this process hang out. That's wrong. And we as a village have to wake up to the fact that if we want to maintain our character as an interracial community, an interclass community, we're going to have to do something about it now. Because our village government can act. It's not too late.
Yep.
Yeah. I wonder if it would be possible to influence the choice of which parcels of land get which type of development. Right now, the parcel of land that's right on the waterfront is going to be built up as housing, whereas what they seem to be labeling as the waterfront park will be set back well away from the waterfront, and in fact, ironically, the waterfront probably won't even be visible from the park because the housing is going to, and the parking lot is going to block it. So I wonder if it might be possible to rewrite the plans to push the park land out onto the waterfront so that it is accessible to the entire community.
Well, no, sorry. Yeah, it is actually. The process we're about to begin now is they call the SEEKR process. It's the environmental review, environmental impact review process. There's going to be a number of things. The ripple effects that Ray referred to before are going to be felt in a number of communities with the existing plan, and perhaps with almost any plan that you do down there, but most definitely the following areas are going to be impacted by the existing plan. Sparta is going to have increased traffic, people going in and out to do the construction project, and then afterward, the people that live in any condominium project down there or apartment or whatever on either side of the tracks are going to be using that whole area to get to the south, jobs in White Plains or whatever. Main Street, Spring, and Snowden Avenue, ditto. Only they're going to bear the brunt of the construction traffic for the next 4 or 5 years. Okay, the Van Cortlandt Avenue, because of the relocation of the school buses.
So you think that those arguments can be used to
I've seen from Vets Park, I've seen 50 to 75 people show up at a half dozen meetings over the last year, angry, ready to lynch people because of what's going to happen just in their area as a consequence of this project. And there are 9 places on my list here.
Do either of you have an idea of what the average cost of the house might be in this development?
Well,
whatever you can get for it.
I think one of the odd things about this is, again, we talk about this as a market-driven, I talk about it as a market-driven process, which is what Don is saying by whatever you can get for it. But if we look at similar, I think that, and it's actually interesting when you ask, for example, the village board meeting I attended, we asked the people present, representing the Capelli people, you know, what they thought the price would be, and nobody had any idea. I find this very strange. If you're telling me that this man is going to invest, or this enterprise is going to invest $70 million in a project on the waterfront, and he doesn't know how he's going to sell these houses within the range, I would say that he's either done some very bad planning or his company ought to fold. They know what the prices will be. I would guesstimate that
they don't do bad planning, and they're not close to fall. One thing, if you want to look at the track record, I would say an analogous project was the Half Moon Bay project in Croton, okay, and that did fold because they went ahead with it. However, that was solely a condominium development. This is a multiple-use project anchored by a parking lot, which in my opinion is the goal of this project. So
$300,000. I wonder what
and above.
Right. I wonder what the effect of putting an average cost of a house of $300,000 into the middle of a low-income community might be, and especially what the interactions of the people currently living there might be with residents from Ossining, and especially from that neighborhood, who walk down into that community trying to visit the waterfront.
Great question, Wesley. That's well, the village government has to deal with that issue. It seems to me that they're quite silent on it. One way to deal with it is to ignore it and to pretend that it's not going to happen, or, like in many developments that have happened all over the country, not only to ignore it, but to turn it into a gated community, in effect.
Right.
One issue here is, for example, will Ossining Police, even though we might be critical in some aspects of Ossining Police, they're a lot better than having private security guards down at the waterfront who may throw out anybody who walks down there,
except
who's not buying stuff.
Which points out the shame of the fact that our Ossining Police Department has come under repeated criticism for its insensitivity to the minority community of Ossining.
But maybe this could raise that issue in a new way, which is to say, will Capelli's development, for example, have the same legal status as a mall, which you can't even pass out political brochures in a mall. In some malls, you'll be thrown out. If you're not consuming, if you're black, if you're poor, if you can't, you know, how's the public space down at that waterfront going to be used? We need as a village to confront that.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank both Don DeBar and Ray SEIDELMAN for their participation today. And if there are any final comments from Kathy?
Just as you see this, in opening up a look at what this development might do to our community, there are many questions that are raised. The more we answer one, the more are raised, and we hope people will respond and come and participate in the dialogue about this.
Could I give this to you guys?
I'd be happy to wear it.
Do you have an extra large for me?
Yes, in my car. I'll give you one.
Thank you for watching.